just in September of last year, I gave the first talk that I'd ever given at the Barber Center at Myrtle Beach, and I was very nervous before that, and spent the Friday before the evening pacing around and being very worried, and finally gave the talk, and Kitty was in the front row, and I couldn't really see her clearly because of the stage lights, but I had the impression that she dozed through most of it. I'm
trying not to do
that.
Michael, for newcomers, you must say how old she is, because they think she was doting.
Okay, yeah. She was 100 at that time.
She had a right to doze.
Right. But afterwards, Dennis McCabe and I carried her out to the car. Carried her out in the chair to the car and put her in the. Dennis lifted her out of the chair and put her in the seat of the car. And Jane, who was driving the car, leant over and said to me, "Kitty and I really enjoyed your talk." And then Kitty took my hand and raised it to her lips and kissed the back of my hand. And then Jane said again how much she and Kitty had enjoyed my talk. And I thought afterwards that what Kitty was really doing was not, whether she heard anything that I said or not, I don't know, but what she was really saying was that she appreciated my effort in talking about Barber. And it just made me realize that people like Kitty, for them, their whole life was focused on Barber, and that they really appreciate the effort that other people make, no matter what the quality is. And I was thinking about that, and I was going through my file of things that I'd gotten over the years from Barber and from the Mandali, and I came across a cable from Barber, which I'm sure I won't find right now. You'll wait, Will.
Yeah.
I think this was after '62. Everyone that had gone to the East-West Gathering in November of 1962 were invited to write to Barber afterwards, and I remember just not knowing what to say and putting it off for months, and then finally writing some. I'm sure what I'm sure was a very sort of brief and who knows what sort of letter. I mean, I was 12 at the time. This cable reads, "Your letter makes me very happy. Stop. My love to you, Barber." And it just felt like it was in that same theme that the Barber in Kitty responds to effort. So you can make my job easier by asking lots of questions and making lots of comments. I was going to start with a brief history that leads into my life with Barber. Francis Brabazon in the book Stay with God wrote that there were three voices that brought Eastern mysticism to the West: Vivekananda, Coomaraswamy, and Inayat Khan. Vivekananda brought Vedantism, the mystical part of Hinduism, or the mystical background of Hinduism, to the West. Coomaraswamy was the curator of the Boston Art Museum and brought the Eastern philosophy of art to the West. And Hazrat Inayat Khan brought Sufism to the West. Inayat Khan was a Bengali musician who had a spiritual experience sometime in his early adulthood, and then between 1910 and 1927, he traveled a lot to the West and established Sufi centers in the US and in Europe and England. And then he also sent the Baron von Frankenberg, the ex-Baron of Frankenberg from Germany, to Australia, to become the Murshid, or the head of the Sufi group in Australia. And Francis Brabazon was an early member of that group. Diana Snow was not.
I was never a Sufi. I joined Francis when he was just finishing.
Yeah. So my parents, one evening were brought. My parents Bill and my father Bill and my mother Joan were brought by, in my father's case, his sister, and in my mother's case, her brother, to a Sufi meeting in Melbourne, Australia, and that's where my parents first met. And this is about 1948, I think. They were both college students. And shortly after that, the Baron heard about Baba from Rabia Martin, who was the Murshida in the US, the head of the Sufi movement in the US. And so the Baron passed on the discourses to Francis, and then Francis, of course, passed them on to the other people in the group. So that's how my parents heard about Baba, was through Sufism. Interesting enough, I don't know how many people know the Bay Area, but I just found out a year ago, I've been living there now for 12 years, I just found out a year ago that Francis Brabazon lived in Fairfax in the Bay Area for a year in 1948 or 49. The Baron von Frankenberg, had sent Francis to the US to meet with Rabia Martin and find out more about Meher Baba. So Francis had actually lived in Fairfax, and by a strange twist of fate, friends of mine now own the property, the Sufi Center. They have nothing to do. They have no connection with the Baba community, but they now own this center, this property. They live there with their family, where there's a stone pathway that Francis Brabazon had built in the late 40s, which is just a very ironic twist. And to digress a moment from my story about meeting Baba, my brother-in-law sent me a poem recently, that an unpublished poem that Francis wrote about that year in Marin County, which I thought I would read. How many people know Mount Tamalpais, Fairfax, Marin County? Okay, so you can visualize a little of this. So this poem is called Mount Tamalpais. So this is a poem that Francis wrote about Mount Tamalpais in 1965. So this is 17 years after, he wrote this in India, so 17 years after this period of living in Marin County. So he writes, "I once lived in Marin County for a year. That could be called an historical act. And went folk dancing. That could be called cultural relations. But what I remember mostly was the line of Mount Tamalpais and the legend about it. That it was once an Indian maid, and the sun god saw her and tried to carry her to his heaven. But she got heavier and heavier in his arms, and at his foot struck Mount Diablo. You can see the cleft he made. And he fell, and she died. And he laid her out on the ground and returned to heaven alone. Every man who loves beauty is a sun god, and beauty becomes heavier and heavier for him to bear, and it all ends in grief and a sort of quiet glory alone. That is why legend is so much more important than history and cultural relations." So, to go back to my story, I was born in 1951. My parents were living in Melbourne at the time. They had known about Baba for about 3 years by that stage. And in 1954, we moved from Melbourne to Sydney to live in the house that Francis and others were building in an outer suburb of Sydney in anticipation of Baba coming to Australia. Diana was involved in building that house. And you may have heard her describe it. The main room is a large, very large room made of sandstone with heavy beams across the ceiling, a very wonderful room, and that is in fact the room that Baba did stay in at night and give darshan in during the daytime. So my sisters Marie and Jenny and my parents and I started living in that house along with Francis, and then in 1954 my father went with Francis and one other Australian man to India for the 3 incredible weeks, and my father met Baba for the first time. I have no memory of that at all. I do actually remember moving. I remember the very first time we arrived in Sydney and going to the front door of the house, which is now known as Mayor House, and I still have a memory of seeing Francis there standing up on a step ladder there were floor to ceiling bookshelves. He was an extremely widely read person, and there were books all over the house in many possible nooks and crannies. So in 1956, Baba did come to Australia in August, I think from August 13th to 16th, I think roughly. August 9 to 14, something like that. 13, 14. And my sisters and mother and father and I moved out of the house, and we stayed in tents in the backyard, which is where you must have stayed too, Diana. The Mayor House at that stage was on an acre of land, so there was lots of room for tents in various spots on the property. I only have fragments of memories from that time. I was 5. I do have an impression of seeing Baba for the first time. I can see him sitting on the corner of there was a bed that he used, a divan that he used at night to sleep on, and was also used as a couch during the day. And I can visualize his figure sitting there on the corner of the bed, not real vividly, but more just an impression of soft dove grey colours and pink and a very soft, almost translucent quality to him. Sometime later that day, or perhaps the next day, I don't remember the exact sequence of events, I found myself sitting on the bed next to him, and he and I started playing this game together where we would try to slap each other's hands. I think that I was holding my hand out, and he would try to slap it, and I would try and pull it back. And I wasn't able to do that. He was much too quick, and he kept hitting my hand. And then he gestured that we reverse roles. And so Baba was holding his hand out, and I was trying to slap his hand. And he was much too quick for me. And I remember getting quite angry with him and hitting faster and faster and harder, trying to catch his hand. And to me, that really captures the main quality that I felt with him. I felt very natural. As a child, I never felt any sense of awe. And I didn't really have any sense of his divinity. That really captures the main quality that I felt with him. I felt very natural. As a child, I never felt any sense of awe. And I didn't really have any sense of his divinity as a child. It was just a very natural, comfortable time that I spent with him. People have told me, I don't remember this, but people have told me that one of the things that I did was come up behind Baba and stick my head between his knees and hold him around the knees so that he couldn't walk freely. Joanna Bruford tells that I do that. As I say, I don't remember doing it, but it seems to fit with the feeling that I had, in the conscious memories that I have of meeting him. Yeah, a lot of my memories of the 3 meetings that I had with Baba, and a lot of my memories of growing up in a Baba family was of these sort of periodic carnivals, these wonderful events that happened in which there was a lot of excitement and a lot of drama and people travelling from different places, and so there's definitely a sense of build-up. There was another side to that, which is that across the top of Mayor House there was a 50, 75-foot banner that said, "Welcome Avatar Mayor Barber." Now this is suburban Sydney in the mid-50s. So across the street are my school friends, sort of half hiding in the bushes, looking at this. And so there was this mixed feeling of some embarrassment, but also a great deal of excitement. And there was always dramas. I mean, when Barber left in 1956, the adults set off fireworks and set the surrounding bushland on fire. So Barber leaves and the fire trucks arrive. So there absolutely was that sense of carnival. I mean, in many ways, it's like the feeling of the Sahavas. When people make that effort, everyone comes together, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and joy, and definitely a sense of excitement. That's all I remember from '56. Just those just that initial impression, and that they're playing that game, trying to catch Barber's hand. In 1958, Barber came back to Australia, and this time Francis and the other adults were concerned that Sydney in June, which is when Barber was due to come, would be too cold for him. So a property was purchased about 700 miles to the north. And being in the southern hemisphere, of course, it's warmer the further you go north. So the property Avatar's Abode was purchased, and that's where Barber came into Sydney, but then went straight up to Brisbane, and then Avatar's Abode. And there was a 3-day Sahavas from June 3rd to 6th, I think. For that particular Sahavas, Barber asked that children under the age of 9 not attend the entire program. 7 or 9. Might have been 7, yeah. Because I forget. I actually turned 7 when Barber was there. So anyway, but my younger sister and I, Jenny, were not there for the whole time. But on my birthday on June 4th, 58, I was there, and Barber gave me Francis or my dad told him told Barber it was my birthday, and so Barber made me come forward and embrace me as his birthday gift. Again, I don't remember the sequence. It might have been later on that day, or it might have been the next day. Barber was distributing prasad, that's throwing candies to various people in the audience, and I'm sure you've seen that in films. And we were in a room twice as wide, maybe twice as long. But the group of people would have been about double this group. Yeah. In any case, Barber was throwing prasad to various people, and sometimes he would look directly at someone like Nancy and then throw it directly at her, or then he would look at Nancy and throw it to Georgina. And again, you've seen Barber do that. So Barber looked at me, and I was sitting perhaps about where Fred is sitting. Barber looked at me, and he threw the prasad like that. And there was a man named John Bruford who did sculpted the bust of Barber that's on Mayor's porch at Mayor's Ad, and I don't know if that's Jurgis's, isn't it? Yeah. The one that John did is smaller than that, and it's white. But anyway, John Bruford was sitting just in front of me and just to the side, and he reached out and snatched the candy out in midair. And everyone laughed. I thought it was great, and Barber laughed too. So Barber gestured for me to come forward and in front of John, so that John wouldn't be able to intercept it again. So Barber looked at me very carefully, and he threw it very softly, and I saw it arc through the air and land in my palms and bounce out. So again, everyone laughed, and including Barber. And so Barber gestured for me to come another 3-4 feet closer, and again he threw it, and again I couldn't catch it. And again everyone laughed. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I didn't feel all that self-conscious. I guess I could see that everyone was enjoying this. I was determined to catch it, but I wasn't able to. So I don't know how many times this happened. This may have happened in 3 or 4 steps. That Barber would throw it and I wouldn't catch it. It would actually hit my palm and bounce out. And then finally he gestured for me to come, and I mean closer than Diana, 3 feet away, and he just threw it ever so softly, and again I just watched it come down, hit my palm, and bounce out. And for a 7-year-old, it's not such a difficult thing to do, to catch something like that. So Barbara, So Barbara gave this gesture, like, how is this possible? And he made me come right up, and then he put the prostate in my hand and folded my fingers over it, and then hugged me. I don't know whether an incident like this has any symbolic meaning. I mean, I actually enjoy telling it to people because I get people have different takes on it. I told the story to Lynn Ott in Myrtle Beach one year, and his comment was that it symbolized the way in which Barbara makes efforts over successive lifetimes to bring us into his fold. I told Francis Brabazon this, and his comment was that I told him the story. His comment was that was typical. That when you're with Barbara, your mind was really absent, and that things that you could normally do quite easily and comfortably, even the simplest things you couldn't do in his presence. I guess Francis had that experience of being unusually bumbling. I actually told the story in Berkeley recently, and Bing Heckman made the comment. He said that when Barbara folded my hand over it, it's almost like he wanted to make the effort to catch hold of me symbolically. So I don't know.
In any case, you're stuck.
Anyway, in any case, I'm stuck. Yeah, through thick and thin. Yeah. The other thing that really stands out in my mind from 1958 was, again, it might have been the same day, the day after. Barbara gestured for me to stand up, and he asked me, who did I love best? Mummy? I mean, this is obviously through Eruch, his interpreter. Who did I love best, Mummy, Daddy, or Barbara? And again, it's curious. I mean, if anyone asked me that today, I would feel incredibly self-conscious. But I mean, I didn't for whatever reason. So I stood there thinking about this question. First of all, I thought about my mother, and I thought about, she's really nice. She does this and that. But on the other hand, she's real fuzzy about this. And then I thought, well, maybe I love my father more. And then, well, no, he might be okay around that area, but he's really grumpy when it comes to that. So I just stood there for who knows, 30 seconds, a minute, just thinking about this question. And all of a sudden, I thought, oh, I know. Barbara wants me to say that I love him the best. So I said, Barbara. In a completely premeditated and insincere way. And Barbara gave me this great smile, like I'd said the most heartfelt, spontaneous thing possible. And he gestured for me to come forward and gave me a hug. So I fooled him, yeah. As Eruch said, I was tricky even in those days. I just wanted to say one other thing about this incident that's always struck me. I'm a psychotherapist, and I deal day in and day out with people dealing with the pain of having grown up in dysfunctional families, of being deeply wounded by their relationships with their parents, and feeling very unloved by their parents or abused by their parents and so on. Sort of things that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, one way or another. And I have thought that in some ways, in this incident, that Barbara was preparing me for this, for the work that I would do. That ultimately we do have to accept God as our most loving parent, and that we ultimately have to give up the dream that our parents can love us as deeply as we would like to be loved. So that's always. Not always. It struck me in recent years that perhaps in some way Barbara was preparing me for being a psychotherapist. Actually, Christine, maybe I'll come back to that question at the end, because that's, let me just, because that sort of brings me up to the present. I think again, that's all I remember at this stage of actually meeting Barbara. Again, there was that great sense of it being a wonderful event, and the excitement, getting to meet the men Mundley again. I'd met them in '56.
Was there any one of them that you were particularly drawn to, or?
I don't remember having anything to do with Erich. I suppose it was, thanks, Will. I suppose it was because he was so focused on Barbara that he didn't have much time for other people. I remember, I think it was Artie giving me some chewing gum, and kind of having like a little exchange with him. But no, I don't. None of them particularly. My relationship with Barbara at that time, in the 50s and the 60s, was very much tied up with a sense of family. To me, the worldwide Barber community did feel very much like a family. Every few months we would get the family letters that would give us news about what was happening in India, and the Mundley did really, even though I only met them 3 times in my childhood, they did feel very much like uncles and aunts to me. And in fact, my sisters and I, and probably Dinah, called them uncle and aunt, and I did that probably until just about 10 years ago that I stopped doing that. And with Diana, she was Auntie Diana for many, many years. I mean, and the Barber community was my family. They felt like my closest relatives.
Francis, what was your relation with Francis to you?
Francis and I, Francis and I were very close. Of course, Francis Brabazon was in India with Barbara from 1958 to 69, so I didn't see him during that time. But before that, I remember going around with him, working on little projects with him. When he went searching for the property that became Avatar's abode, I went with him on one of the trips. So I remember just that adventure of traveling with him. And he has a very, I still feel very close to him.
He was very interested in all you children.
Yeah.
Paid a good deal of attention to his recollection.
Yeah.
Like a very kindly young grandfather.
Yes, it felt like that. Have people seen that Robert Bly videotape, A Gathering of Men? Have you seen that? Robert Bly is an American poet that's talked a lot about about grief and about men's issues, and he comments that for so many men in our society, we never have the experience of being admired by an older man, and we don't have older men who we admire, and how that's a very crippling thing, that absence. And I feel that in my relationship with Francis that he admired me, and he admired not just me personally, but the family and other young Barber lovers, people of my generation. And of course we all admired him, and it was a very wonderful thing. He wrote, over the years that he was with Barber, he wrote to me a number of times, and I brought a couple of things with him. Maybe this is a good time to read them. The first one is a little personal, but I'll risk embarrassing myself. When I was growing up, I was very keen on the sport of cricket, which is like very, very roughly like baseball. And Francis and the other Mundley and Barber showed interest in my interest in cricket. So Francis wrote this it looks like in 1964. With a lot of things that Francis wrote, he dated them from the day and the week and the year of Barbara's birthday. So 2870, I think, is sometime in 64. I think if you take 6 from 70, I think is the...
Really? So
is that how it works?
Kind of the way that modern, dates spring from Christ's birth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what Francis did, yeah. So I think this is, anyway, this I think is April 15th, 1964. This, Dear Michael, the bold bowler bowls, the brave batsman strikes. Alas, back to the pavilion he hikes. But not so with Michael, the champ of champs. The ball goes into orbit, the crowd yells and stamps. Round the field floats the ball from gravitation sundered, and the scorer marks up Barber's Marco 100. For some reason, and I, to this day I don't know why, there was a period of a number of years where Barber and the Mandali called me Marco rather than Michael. So,
What's that?
Marco, M-A-R-C-O. Marco, yeah. That's with love, Uncle Francis. And here's another thing on sports that I really like. This was day 5, week 1, May year 71, which Francis puts in brackets afterwards, March 5th, 65. So it says, My dear Michael, as beloved Barber's Australian cricketer, I thought you would appreciate a recent message of his to the Andhra Pradesh Sports Council 3-day meet. This is for you, Fred. You can use this. When excellent performance by one's opponent is appreciated equally with that by one's own side, sport not only makes for physical fitness and mental alertness, but it becomes a spiritually enriching experience. I hope, Michael, you have had a good season both as a batsman and bowler. Love, Uncle Francis. It's beautiful, isn't it? I think that may be in the family letters, that quote. Let me read just one other poem on the subject of Francis. This is I find a very beautiful poem that Francis wrote and gave to me in 4/47/77, means 71. Yeah, so this is after he came back from India. From sleep to sleep, for Michael. I go from sleep to sleep, looking for a hand that fits my own, searching for a face in that place I call my heart I have always known. I wait from sleep to sleep for that one who is looking for me, who I have known since the beginning of eternity. I used to cry at flowers opening their petals in summer rain. I used to look at your eyes in the stars and know you'd come again. All that was long ago. Now I look for a hand that will fit my own and search for the face of that one I have always known. So my childhood in Barber family had these wonderful times, these wonderful contacts with the other Australian, the Barber community in Australia, Diana and everyone else, with the Mandali. I just noticed I had a letter from Pendu there. It's on basically on the same theme of encouraging me to play more cricket and to take it more seriously. And to exercise more, was his thing. He'd given me this series of exercises I was supposed to do every day.
Did you do them?
Probably not. No, I don't think so. I don't think I did them as conscientiously as he would have liked.
When you got these letters from Pendu or from Francis, was it, kind of an exciting thing to get this letter, or did you kind of take it a little for granted, or?
Took it a little for granted. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's really nowadays, that Francis and Pendu have passed on. It's like, I just put this in a folder for the first time yesterday. These were just stuck in a bag for years. I treasure them more and more, and at the time I definitely took them for granted. Yeah. Francis had a real feel for the romance of life, and he wasn't shy to share that. He understood love, and for example, throughout most of my teen years, I was in love with surfing. like some of you may have had that experience, like surfing was my passion, I lived and breathed it. And Francis, more than perhaps any other adult, understood that. I mean, he understood passion for anything and everything. So I don't know if that explains it at all, but...
it was a beautiful thing. He's not afraid to share his passion.
No, he was definitely a passionate person in everything that he did. Yeah, I don't know, that feels kind of incomplete, but it's the best thing. Some of the other things that I remember from that time that again I took for granted was getting manuscripts from India, from Baba for example, the Everything and the Nothing, and then Francis's books, East West Gathering, Stay with God, and we would proofread the galley proofs. When the printer first prints out the book, you get it in long sheets, and you've got to go through and look for mistakes. So I remember sitting around with my sisters and my parents, and probably again other people like Diana, reading capital God is capital love, stop. Capital and, capital love, and reading these profound words for the very first time in this very odd way. So that's, I mean, my first reading of a lot of these books was reading them as galley proofs. Francis would also send songs to us from India and melodies, and we would sit around in the evenings and sing them. Which again I took for granted, but looking back was just a delightful experience. Another thing that my parents did that I really treasure a lot, again looking back, we didn't have television or radio, and in the evenings after dinner, my father would read books to us. He would serialize books. We read the Ramayana, the story of Rama, and he would always make a point of stopping at the most exciting point, and then we'd have to wait till the next night to continue. I think we read the Mahabharata. We read the book Monkey, the story of taking the Buddhist gospel from India to China, and that was a delightful thing that they did for us. My parents didn't impose Baba upon us in any direct way much. They did. There was a time when, leaving aside direct orders from Baba, like for example to say the prayers every day, which we would all do. They didn't make us do any real practices, although there was a time when they had us read passages out of Baba books at certain times of the day. I remember there's a little message in Listen Humanity called Message to Youngsters. I remember my parents having me read that out aloud, which I appreciated. I enjoyed it, and I did have some sense that it was, the meaning of it. There was another story that they had me read, the story of the ant and the frog. The ant's crossing a stream on a leaf, and the leaf overturns. Does anyone? I don't even know where that's from. Yeah. I think the story goes that the ant is crossing the stream on a leaf, and the leaf overturns, and the ant says, "Help, help, the world is drowning." And a frog nearby says, "No, it's not the world that's drowning, it's you that's drowning." And the ant says, "Well, something like, if I drown, the world drowns too." Is that the point of it? But as a kid, it's like, that was way over my head. It was much too subtle. I remember being puzzled about that. Attend one class period a week in religious instruction, because there's not the constitutional separation of state and church. So for the purposes of that, my parents put down that our religion was Protestant, I think. But no, I've actually never been to a church service. I've only been in a church once or twice in my life. So no, our lives were definitely focused on Baba right from the outset.
So if we put you on a riser, you wouldn't feel like you were in a church or anything?
No. That's some of the good part of this. it was also very hard. I have two sisters, an older sister Marie and a younger sister Jenny, and to some extent we all suffered a lot of we all suffered embarrassment and a lot of self-consciousness about growing up in this family, having pictures of Baba on the walls of our homes. I think my older sister suffered the most. I think I suffered a lot. Jenny, I think, came out of it for whatever reason a little less traumatized by it, but it was definitely a difficult thing. I remember a number of times getting into fights, physical fights with school friends, or the boys at school would tease me. They would call Baba a witch. The photograph of Baba in the comely coat with the long hair. My friends would say, why have you got a picture of a witch in your house? And I would be both embarrassed and angry, and I would respond physically. There was a time, and luckily I only heard about it I heard about it years after it happened, but the parents of two of my closest friends actually burnt some Baba books as a sort of a Christian protest against what they considered to be this blasphemous thing. And this is the 1950s in the outer suburbs of Sydney, and it's not surprising. So part of what my relationship with Baba has been as an adult over the years has been trying to get over a lot of that self-consciousness, and it's still, I can still get easily embarrassed in certain situations where where if a stranger asks me about Baba, because of that. You must have had some of that, Christine. How would you?
Identifying as you were talking.
Yeah. I wouldn't have had it any other way, and as time goes by, I appreciate it more and more. But it wasn't easy, and it may be obvious, but for those of you that have children, I would really encourage you to make sure that you talk to them.
They learn how to defend themselves.
They learn how to defend themselves. Yeah.
What do you suggest?
I mean, I think I think my parents just assumed that we would know how to respond to teasing, and I didn't. And I think that it's real easy to assume that. I don't mean to be lecturing you. I mean, I'm just telling you, from my own experience that it was hard. We got my first memory of Baba in 1962 was we arrived a day late for the East West Gathering.
The late ones.
Yeah, and
strike.
Right. And so we, my father was already there. My mother and my sisters and I came up on the stage, and you actually see my older sister Marie in the East West Gathering film, not the edited one, not the one by Ginny Katz, but in some of the raw footage you see her embracing Baba. And I walked towards Baba and leaned over to embrace him. And as I did, I had a brief experience of his effulgence. There's just a very brief sense of sort of a brilliance, of a tremendous light emanating from him. And it was just real quick. And that was really the only out of the ordinary experience that I ever had with Baba. But it was just that very brief thing, and then I went down and we embraced, and then they went off the stage.
That was the first time that you saw him on that trip, was when he was actually up on the stage?
Yes, yeah. There were two cameramen at the East West Gathering. There was I guess it was Anis Hassan, and then there was Baba's brother Bayram and Jahangir Sukadwala. And most of that edited film of the East West Gathering is taken from the Anis Hassan footage. So it's probably in the other footage was by. Yeah, when I've heard adults talk about the East West Gathering, I'm surprised how similar the experience is. There was another time where we all came out of Guru Prasad, all the Westerners came out of Guru Prasad, and for a photo opportunity, and Baba sat in a chair, and then we all formed a semicircle around him, and you see that so people could take still photographs, and you see that in the movie footage. I'm sitting down at Barbara's at his feet on the left-hand side of the chair, and my sister Jenny is standing directly behind him. When Barbara stood up, I stood up, and I was the closest person to him. I was, 18 inches apart from him. And I remember I looked up into his eyes, and I searched for his eyes to sort of just to look him in the eye and make contact with him. And I was surprised that he wouldn't look at me, even though I was right there in his face, as they say. His eyes just darted either side of mine, and he wouldn't look at me. And that was the experience. It's like I really wanted to contact him, I really wanted to entertain him, I really wanted to make him laugh, but I couldn't. And I was telling this to some people in Berkeley recently, and Ron Greenstein made the comment just a few months ago that other people have said that Barbara's power was so manifest at the East-West Gathering that he had to shield people from it. So I don't know whether that's why he wouldn't look at me, but it was a very actually an uncomfortable experience for a child, because I couldn't make sense of it. And 30 years later, Ron comes up with this comment. It's maybe, I don't know, who knows whether it's the truth or not.
Did you mention that to your parents at all, or
no, I didn't mention that.
Just kept it to yourself?
Yeah. I don't know. In some ways, Barbara was so close to me and to my family and to my world that I didn't even think about him being God. I remember throughout my life, I guess there have been two questions for me. One is Barbara the Avatar? And the other is, if so, what should I do about it? The first question, there's really never been any doubt. It's like, I think I must have been about 5 when my parents or Francis explained the idea that God took human form from time to time. To me, that just made such perfect sense. It's like, why bother doubting it? It's like it was just like an immediate acceptance of that, and I've never doubted that, and I've never doubted that Barbara is the Avatar. My commitment to that, my enthusiasm for that, has waxed and waned over the years. So I guess I've always accepted him as God, and there's never been a moment. There's never been a moment in which I can say, yeah, that's the moment, that's the dream, or that's the experience, or that's the comment that made me believe he was God. And people express envy that I met Barbara. I personally, I envy people that have, what they call conversion experiences. I don't have a moment like that to hold on to. I don't have a moment of insight or a moment of, don't be shy, John. I'm not being modest in saying this. I have absolutely no idea I have no sense of having benefited from meeting Barbara. I have no sense of that at all. I don't know that. I don't know what I gained from it.
Well, we invited you here tonight.
but I had to ride with Charlie in his.
Negates it.
The other thing I can say about my relationship with Barbara is that I'm not aware that my relationship with Barbara has become more intense or more heartfelt. What I am aware is that other things have become relatively less interesting. Like I don't surf anymore. But seriously, other things that I was more interested in have just dropped away. And Barbara stays there as a constant. So it's almost like against the relief of other things dropping away that that's more how I feel about my relationship with Barbara. It's a good question. The first thing that comes to my mind was I did a doctoral course at a school in Berkeley in psychology, and I had a teacher, actually an Indian, a Sikh, Meiji Singh was his name, and the course was on something like consultation for organizations. I mean, it was nothing to do with spirituality, nothing to do with, pretty much very little to do with clinical psychology. It was, like going into organizations and problem solving and so on. In the middle of this class, for some reason, this is about 80, this must have been about 82 or 83, Meiji Singh so interrupted what he was talking about, and he said that Jung had once commented that in order to make spirituality your own, in order to make spirituality one's own, one has to give up the religion of one's parents. And for some reason at that time, that just hit me like a thunderbolt. It's like, so I started this intense questioning. Is my relationship with Baba from me, or am I just following on? Am I going to India every year because that's what I grew up doing? In 83 I was early 30s. So I went through this time period where I decided not to go to India again until I really felt drawn, and in fact I didn't go for about 5 years until I could feel that it was really for me and not just from a sense of habit. So that's one moment where I felt like I challenged myself to make this about me and Baba and not through my parents. I think I've probably done that all along in smaller ways. But I didn't go through a real obvious rebellion in my teen years. On the contrary, I think my late teens I was actually very focused on Baba. It was a very sort of devotional period for me. Yeah, for better or for worse. I mean, maybe it would have been better if I'd been more rebellious. I don't know. I mean, for example, I read the discourses and the chapter on the problem of sex when I was 16 or 17, and Baba's message is so strong there about sex, and as a teenager, that put me in a tremendous amount of conflict with my own feelings and also my peer group, and in some ways, it may have been too early to read that, or in some ways I maybe took it too literally. So I don't know. Maybe a little more rebellion might have been a little healthier. I just don't know, John. I don't. What comes to my mind, Linda, is that I feel like I've gotten a lot of external guidance from the Mandali, and maybe that's in lieu of internal guidance. I mean, I feel like my real education has been sitting in Mandali Hall, not in Berkeley. So I feel like I've gotten a lot of very practical guidance from the Mandali and from the elders in the Baba community. Yeah, I don't think I feel internally guided by Baba. I was just saying that.
Well, that's one benefit that Baba gave you.
Yeah, I was just saying that as far as I'm consciously aware, physically meeting Baba, I don't know what that benefit is of physically having met him. I think appreciatively of Baba and of Baba in my life every day. I think just about every day.
Well, what would it be if you hadn't met him? I mean, that kind of speculation. What would you be if you hadn't known him?
I don't know.
You'd be like some of those other psychologists.
Heaven forbid.
You said that your active interest in Baba has come and go. Can you characterize what made it become more important? What made it come back?
Suffering.
I'd love to hear you finish your talk.
Okay. Just a couple of other memories from the East-West Gathering. One, talking about uncomfortable moments. All the Westerners went by bus from Pune to Mahabaleshwar for a day's outing, one day, and I was sick with some kind of stomach upset. So my mother and I stayed back in the hotel, and mid-morning, one of the Mandali, I think it might have been Meiji, came to the hotel and said that Baba had sent for my mother and I. So we went in the car to Guru Prasad and went into the side room that was a pale blue room. It was on the right hand side as you go in the main hall. You might remember it from '69. There was Baba was sitting in his blue chair there, and there were several men mandali, and there was an Indian family over to the side, and my mother and I greeted Baba, and this Indian family had there was a young girl about 11, roughly my age, with them, and I was drawn to her, and I was noticing her, and back to Ahmednagar, back to Merzad. And I remember everyone gathered. Baba was seated at the base of the tree, the big, I guess it's a neem tree, I don't know what sort of tree it is. And maybe a mango. Yeah, could be. And people were huddled around Baba. And for some reason, although I was usually pretty diffident and didn't push myself forward with Baba, I did have some sense that this was important, so I remember pushing and wriggling through this crowd and getting through until I came out of Baba's feet and sat by him. And then after a short time, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, he was either carried or I think walked from the tree to the car.
Unfortunately, I was towards the outskirts. I
Right, certain advantages of being a kid. And so I followed him out, and I stood at the back bumper of the car as Baba got in, and then he slowly drove away. And I remember having a very clear feeling that was the last time that I would ever see him, and that was my only intuition. Of course, it turned out to be true with Baba. So, that's it.
Matthew, you sing. You have a wonderful voice.
Yeah, Matthew. You sing, I'll sing with you.
Please don't.
Maybe I should just read a poem.
Sing.